If you've ever played a horror game, you'll no doubt be familiar with that sinking feeling of dread when confronted with a shadowy new area to explore. You've no idea what lies in wait, but you simply have no choice but to push on if you want to see it through to the end. And more often than not, the survival horror genre makes thorough exploration a key component in its gameplay. So not only will you need to venture into the scary unknown, you're gonna have to search every nook and cranny to find precious resources. That or you'll find something whose favorite food just so happens to be your face. I'm Jess from WhatCulture, and here are the 10 most terrifying horror game locations. Number 10. The Attic. Remothered, Tormented Fathers. A throwback to the likes of Clock Tower and Haunting Ground, the Remothered series has been quietly flying the flag for old-school survival horror for the past couple of years. And for those that love the run-and-hide type of horror games, they're an absolute treat. After being constantly chased up and down stairs by a psychotic, moth-controlling nun and a naked old man, yes, you did hear that correctly, you're urged to go up into the mansion's attic, which definitely sounds like a good idea. There's only one entrance, and you're going to know if you're followed, which does go some ways to making you feel safe. Well, sadly for you, Tormented Fathers loves to pull the rug out from underneath you, and upon entering the attic, you're confronted with a small army of creepy mannequins. You've got no choice but to wade through them in search for your next key item, and the palpable tension that this relatively small area conjures up is truly frightening. All of which is perfectly punctuated by a highly telegraphed but ultimately very well-earned jump scare that immediately throws you straight back into the white-knuckle chases the rest of the game's made up of. Number 9. Titan Elementary School. Dead Space 2. There's certainly no shortage of truly terrifying areas to be found in the Dead Space series, or at least in the first 2 entries. But if you had to single out the one that freaked out players the most, it'd definitely have to be Titan Elementary School. Given that these games are a constant barrage of white-knuckle enemy encounters and truly nauseating body horror, players could already feel the hairs on the back of their necks stand to attention upon coming across the seemingly wholesome-looking school. Its brightly lit front door and child-friendly aesthetic are in stark contrast to everything else around it, making it feel that little bit more threatening. Upon stepping inside, everything seems completely innocuous. That is, until you see a lady in an adjacent room beckoning over a deformed worm-like baby that proceeds to explode, filling the entire room with viscera. Things don't get much better from here, as you're quickly besieged by plenty of the nasty little buggers, who can cause you a great deal of damage if they explode when next to you. They go down with a single shot most of the time, but keeping them at bay will keep you constantly on edge. Number 8. The Vocational Block. OUTLAST Whistleblower. Exploring a supposedly abandoned mental hospital isn't really something that any sane person would think to do, but the protagonists of both OUTLAST and its subsequent prequel DLC Whistleblower seem to think it's a good idea, and you, as a result, are going along with them for the ride. Naturally, the hospital is not abandoned, and the inmates have very much taken over, brutalizing anyone who dares enter with numerous creative and nauseating methods, which further hammers home the idea that you simply shouldn't be there. During your time with Whistleblower, you'll end up in the Vocational Block, a learning space that has lost all notion of rehabilitation and instead is the stalking grounds for the Groom, one of the series' most deranged and downright dangerous foes, and one that has every intention of you being his new bride, in both the literal and physical sense. The Groom's lurking presence makes this area bad enough on its own, but the open-plan classroom areas and narrow windows for escape make this an especially hectic and stressful area to be pursued through, and you'll have very little time to take in your surroundings, as the Groom will be on your trail in a moment's notice. Number 7. The Rat King's Lair. The Last of Us Part 2. Often when The Last of Us is put under the critical eye, the praise is always lavished on its writing, character development, and well-constructed gameplay, all of which are completely valid things to praise, but the game's horror elements aren't usually given the same amount of adoration. This is particularly surprising when you consider that both games in the series feature several scary moments and set pieces that really crank up the intensity. Case in point, the Lair of the Rat King in The Last of Us Part 2. The level starts off like any other Last of Us mission, with players sneaking into an incredibly dark area full of the infected, in the hopes of retrieving some much-needed medical supplies. Upon finding what you are looking for, the Rat King makes itself known, cornering you with an ambulance. After kicking out the door, a multi-stage battle with the deformed monstrosity begins, which sees you having to run through plenty of narrow corridors, avoid obstacles, and mash the buttons on your controller into mush to get through some rather hairy QuickTime events. It may not be particularly long, but it's undoubtedly the series' finest horror moment. Number 6. Spencer Mansion, Resident Evil Remake. Whilst the original game Spencer Mansion was a thoroughly creepy collection of corridors and carnage, the GameCube Remake's revamped version is a literal smorgasbord of unending horrors and genuine frights that can still get the best of players on repeat playthroughs. Essentially taking the bones of the original game's mansion and grafting on a few unholy appendages, this new iteration has plenty of new rooms, areas, and nasty surprises that will not only put new players through the ringer, but also throw nasty curveballs at returning fans. If the moody gothic atmosphere and nonsensical design weren't enough to keep you on your toes, the plethora of zombies, mutants, and other such nasties that roam its halls will be enough to make you fudge your undies. The added inclusion of Crimson Heads only serves to make the locale even more dangerous, as the roads most traveled can still harbor unforeseen dangers and surprise attacks. And whilst navigating the luscious mansion is a tension-filled roller coaster, there are a few other horror game locations that are as fun and rewarding to unravel. Finding new shortcuts and workarounds for previously inaccessible areas is every bit as satisfying as it is life-saving. Number 5. ABBOTT State Penitentiary, The Suffering. Prisons aren't exactly the most welcoming environments at the best of times, so having to make your way through one that's been overrun with demonic entities was never going to be an ideal scenario to find yourself in. But for death row inmate Talk, that's the very situation he's in. Not only is ABBOTT State Penitentiary a drab, dreary, and overly depressing place generally, but once all hell breaks loose, it becomes a whole lot more oppressive and hostile, with numerous bloodthirsty enemies ready to burst from the cells, as well as the ghosts of Talk's victims haunting him. It's safe to say that this is an environment that is not conducive to anyone's rehabilitation. Each wing of the prison is also home to its own unique creatures, all of whom are based upon the various methods of execution that death row inmates are subjected to. Perhaps the most disturbing of all is the mainliners, creatures whose spines and eye holes are adorned with lethal injections, and they love nothing more than leaping on Talk so they can stab him in the eyes with their sharp facial appendages. Probably best to stay on the right side of the law. Number 4. The Town Itself, Silent Hill series. No matter if you're playing the groundbreaking first run of Silent Hill games or the less refined later entries, the one constant amongst all of the horrifying weirdness is that you're gonna have to trek through the foggy streets of this once serene vacation town. And every single time without fail, it'll have you on the edge of your seat. Originally brought about by technical limitations, the overbearing fog that obscures the city streets ended up being a defining asset of the game's overall design, and helped to amplify the already palpable sense of dread that the game was conveying. The actual streets themselves may be rather large and barren, but the implication of what may be hiding in the fog, coupled with unnerving soundscapes that hint at unseen dangers, makes any excursion between major areas an unbearably tense experience. Should you have the guts to go exploring, however, you'll find a bounty of health and ammo pickups that'll be beneficial in the long run, as well as several smaller set pieces and details that help add further weight and context to each game's narrative. It's a classic locale for all the right reasons, and one we hope to revisit again sometime soon. Number 3. Abandoned Shopping Mall, Condemned Criminal Origins. Dolls and mannequins may seem like shorthand for lazy scares these days, but when implemented correctly, they can produce some of the most terrifying set pieces the medium has ever seen. Case in point, Condemned Criminal Origins' infamous abandoned shopping mall. Of all the decaying urban environments you'll have to explore during your time playing as SCU investigator Ethan Thomas, the shopping mall is definitely the one that'll linger in your nightmares for the longest time. Upon entering the disused shopping plaza, we immediately catch sight of mannequins in the distance. Creepy enough on its own, but then we see some walking around in an inaccessible area. From that point on, the gloves are off, and any mannequins that are strewn around the area are a potential enemy that's ready to pounce on you at a moment's notice. You'd think that surviving that onslaught would be the end of the nightmare, but oh boy, you'd be very wrong. We'll avoid specifics as you should absolutely experience this one for yourself firsthand, but the level's final set piece is undoubtedly one of the most terrifying and memorable horror set pieces that the medium's ever seen. Tread carefully and be suspicious of every mannequin. Number 2. House Beneviento, Resident Evil Village. You no doubt saw this one coming. Despite Resident Evil Village not being an out-and-out scarefest, House Beneviento is a clear attempt by Capcom to prove to the naysayers that not only were they capable of upping the terror in their flagship horror series, but they were able to stand toe-to-toe with any other horror game out there. Tapping into the current horror game zeitgeist and stripping away any semblance of combat, House Beneviento is a nerve-shredding excursion that starts with you taking apart a mannequin, lots of mannequins, to uncover key items, and it ends with you barely escaping a giant gelatinous malformed baby that wants nothing more than to swallow you whole. It's an expertly placed and well-constructed sequence, one that starts with the player exploring an eerily quiet house which gives way to a dollmaker's workshop, and that's soon plunged into darkness. From there, the intensity and sense of paranoia builds to unbearable levels as the world around you becomes increasingly more hostile. It was a smart decision by Capcom to focus the game's marketing on both the werewolf enemies and the woefully underutilized Lady Dimitrescu, because this particularly harrowing surprise is one of the reasons that players will never forget their first time playing Village. Number 1. SCP Foundation Secure Facilities. SCP Containment Breach. Born from the darkest recesses of the internet, the infamous SCP Foundation's facilities are the perfect distillation of pure, unbridled terror within the video game medium. For those unaware, the SCP Foundation makes it their mission to capture, imprison, and research numerous supernatural entities, housing them all within its bleak and oppressive facilities that are full of precarious corners, cleverly designed blind spots, and tight claustrophobic corridors, all of which are not particularly helpful if one of those beings should escape its confines. And as luck would have it, that's the exact scenario you'll find yourself in should you be brave enough to tackle the SCP games. It doesn't matter which of the monsters you're up against, because no matter the threat, the facility itself will always be against you, with its labyrinthine design, which is made all the worse by its layout being randomly generated in each playthrough. Exploration of your surroundings will yield useful findings, such as items that will aid in survival, but your running shoes are likely going to be your sole savior in this never-ending stretch of corridors. You'll never truly be ready for the horrors of the SCP facility, and that's why it's so damn terrifying. That's the end of our list, but let me know down in that comment section what your pick is for the most terrifying horror game location. As always, I've been Jess from WhatCulture. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. If you like, you can come say hello to me on my Twitter account where I'm at Jess McDonald, but make sure you stay tuned to us here for plenty more gaming goodness. Thanks.